Hi everyone, and welcome to a brand new series. For the next few videos we're going to be looking at the very sharp variations that arise within the poison pawn variation of the Winawer French defence, which we have before us here now. The way that this position is reached is as follows. White opens with e4 and black answers with e6, which is the French defence, which got its name from a correspondence match between London and Paris, played in 1834. Many top players have used it since then: Botvinnik, Petrosian, Ivanchuk, and brilliant Morozevich, to name a few. These days, depending on which database you look at, it's either the second or third most popular response to e4 at all levels, behind only the Sicilian and answering symmetrically with e5. There's nothing more boring than symmetry in chess, and while the Sicilian is a great weapon, most of its lines are very well known, and black surrenders the centre to white early in the game. For these reasons, among others, the French has become my own personal favourite defence to e4. And it's funny actually, because I always open with e4, and part of the reason I learnt the French was because I hated playing against it and wanted to learn its dynamics and strategies well, so I would know what to play against it. And it was whilst doing that that I realised what a great defence it was, and as I said, it's now become my principal weapon against e4. Bobby Fischer always opened with e4, and the opening against which he did worst was the French defence. He had a relatively poor record against it compared to other defences. The main line goes d4, d5, and here white has a few options. The exchange variation with e takes d5 is not advisable for several reasons. Pretty much the only drawback of the French defence is the light square bishop. With black's centre pawns fixed on light squares, the bishop is often an ineffective piece in the early part of the game. By playing the exchange variation, white immediately liberates this bishop after black recaptures with e takes d5, and what's more, this is well known to give black immediate equality. The position here is symmetrical, dull, and the tension that was there is gone. Before white recaptured, he was cramping black's game, and it's better to keep that going if you can. When my opponent plays the exchange variation, I'm happy to take the equality, but I don't get my hopes up for an interesting and dynamic game, which is the real essence of the French defence, much more so than in the solid but boring Caro-Kann, which is what I used to play. So we go back. Knight d2 is the Tarrasch variation, where white has a small and safe advantage if he plays correctly. However, he's hemming in his dark squared bishop, and with his knight on d2 as opposed to c3, he has less control of the crucial square d5, but at the same time he's able to move his c-pawn, and this is a useful factor when playing against the French. I often play the Tarrasch against the French for these reasons. Another possibility is the advance variation with e5, and this is the move that Aron Nimzowitsch, who did mountains of work on the opening in the early 20th century, thought best for white. The main line here goes c5, c3, knight c6, knight f3, and queen b6, which immobilizes white's dark squared bishop because of the pawn at b2, and also adds pressure to the pawn at d4, which black will increase in order to undermine white's centre, and it would be bad for white to take on c5, because after black recaptures with his bishop, there's strong pressure on f2, and white's going to have to deal with that, and at the same time he'll have to organise a secure defence for this pawn that will have advanced too far. Now he's going to have to defend that with pieces. And this here before us now is a standard pawn structure in the French, and it almost always dictates that black expands and attacks on the queen side, whilst white does the same on the king side, and it leads to complex and dynamic positions, similar in many ways to the king's Indian defence. In the longer term, black has most of the positional advantages, and it's easy for him to undermine white's centre with c5, as he's doing here, and also later with f6, which often leads to an open f-file, which can be lethal for directly attacking the white king if he castles on the king's side, and also for exchange sacks on f3 to open up the king's position, and also increase black's control of the center. So let's go back, because the variation that we're going to look at for this series is when white plays knight c3, and this is the most popular continuation for white. Black almost always plays c5 in the French, which creates a weakness at d6, and from c3 the knight is making the first step there. You know, he can get there by b5, and d6 would be a really strong outpost square for him. And also white doesn't block in his dark square bishop with knight c3. And here black has several options. The classical French defense position is with knight f6, and there's also the Rubinstein variation with d takes e4. But the one that we're going to look at in this series is the notorious Winawer variation, where black plays bishop b4 now, pinning this knight. This variation is named after the great Polish player Simon Abramovich Winawer, who lived and played predominantly during the 19th century. It was later pioneered, as I said, by Nimzowitsch and Botvinnik. The immediate threat from black is d takes e4, seeing as the knight is now pinned, and to meet this threat, white often plays e5, which also gains some space. Black can now immediately attack the white center with c5, which is the mainline move that white often meets with a3, allowing black, some would say controversially, to double white's pawns with bishop takes c3 check, and now comes of course b takes c3. Bobby Fischer once famously renounced the Winawer, saying that it was anti-positional and weakened the king side. And it's certainly true that black has weakened his king side by giving up his dark squared bishop, notably g7 is weak now. Not to mention he's left with only his bad bishop here on c8 locked in behind the pawns. But the position is closed for now, and if it stays that way, the black knights should be better than the white bishops. Black has also doubled white's c-pawns and isolated his a-pawn, which provides good targets and tactics for the duration of the game. He also has an outpost square on c4. The b file, on the other hand, can be good for white, and black has to be careful not to succumb to a rapid kingside attack. Another thing to consider is a4 and bishop a3, where the bishop's going to be strong on this diagonal. And here there are two main moves for black: queen c7 and knight e7. So let's have a look at queen c7. Queen g4 is the most aggressive and tactical way for white to play, and the variation that we're going to look at for the duration of this series. One point of playing queen c7 is so he can meet this move with f5, where the queen is defending g7, but the poison pawn variation is where black plays knight e7 instead. So now comes queen takes g7, attacking the rook, and rook g8 makes the most sense, forcing the queen away, and now she takes the poison with queen takes h7. So why is it a poison pawn, you might ask? The reason is that although white will be a pawn up, in terms of the overall position, black is better. If we look at the board here, black is ahead in development with 3 pieces in play, as opposed to the sole queen from white, which is moved 3 times. Black has control of the g-file, which can be savage for attacking the castled white king. His queen and knight are developed, and he can now play c takes d4, smashing white's center because white's unable to recapture. If c takes d4, queen c3 check, wins the rook at a1. The normal continuation is knight e2, where black has many options, the main one being knight b c6, putting further pressure on white's center. Queen d3 is one way for white to continue, so we're set for a very sharp middle game. Another thing to take note of is that white has a passed h-pawn, and that can be useful for counterplay, and black has a lot of scope for creativity. The c-file is often a focus, and from here he can play bishop d7 and castle queenside as long as he's careful about the open b-file. White is a pawn up, but black is ahead in development and has many strong ways to get a grip on the position, especially by getting his center pawns mobile, which is usually fairly easy, and marching down the center of the board with his pawns and his pieces. But white isn't without counterplay, so as you would expect, it leads to complex, rich, and ultra-dynamic games. Okay, well that's it for now, a basic intro to the Winawer. Next video we'll look at a sample GM game with black winning in less than 25 moves. So I hope you enjoyed this vid. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.